Coming up, Trump is king of the world. I'll illustrate this point by looking at the way that Trump is handling the dispute over illegals with the president of Colombia. Political commentator Jack Posobiec, editor of Human Events, joins me. We're going to talk about the Trump assassination and the impact of that attempt on what Trump is doing now. Also about some of the controversial cabinet nominations that are in the slot for this week. Hey, if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube, listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to the channel. Hit the subscribe or follow button. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
Today's episode of the podcast is somewhat amusingly called King of the World. And if you want to have a chuckle, take a look at Debbie's thumbnail for today's podcast. Trump is really riding high, and he's riding high not just on the domestic front, but also on the international front. Look at the blizzard of actions on the domestic front, from border security to the 200 or so executive orders, the pardons extended far and wide, January 6th, the FACE Act. And Trump is also cooking on the policy front. He's working closely with Mike Johnson at the House and Thune in the Senate, not to mention the cabinet nominees lining up and I think going to be getting through one by one. So this is a level of presidential vigor that is not only a sharp contrast to Biden, but I think pretty much unprecedented in my adult lifetime. And then on the international front, look at the way in which Trump is opening up areas that you wouldn't even expect. I mean, you would expect him to talk about, look, I want to bring the Ukraine war to an end. And so he posts about why it's in Russia's interest also to do that, and how there's going to be quick action to try to make that happen. Trump was instrumental in the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, a deal that had to be negotiated through third parties. And although it happened under Biden, and some of the actual provisions of the deal were carved out by Biden, but Biden couldn't get it done. That's the point. It took Trump to carry this to completion. And now, look at the way in which the United States is dispatching criminal illegals back to their own countries. This is happening. This has started. It's underway. It's only going to expand rapidly, in the words of Tom Homan. And it's not just going to be confined to criminals. Or to put it somewhat differently, all illegals are criminals. Why? Because all illegals, by being illegal, have broken the law. So the question is not, is this illegal a criminal? Yes, the answer is yes. It is, what degree of criminality are we talking about? Are we talking about merely breaking the law by coming across the border, or the fact that you're also a gang member and you also sell drugs and you've also engaged in child trafficking? So there's crime upon crime upon crime, but there's no such thing as an illegal who hasn't broken the law. That's a point to keep in mind. So Trump dispatches some illegals from Colombia. Debbie says, be careful, don't say Colombia, otherwise people will think it's Columbia University. Colombia. They're sent back to Colombia, and apparently the flights are blocked by the Colombian authorities. And so Trump, galvanized into action, basically says, look, the socialist president over there, Gustavo Petro, is trying to resist taking back his own citizens. I mean, what kind of message does that send? Think about it. My citizens stink. My citizens suck. I don't really want them back. They're horrible. You keep them. They got over to the border, so we don't want them back. Well, I mean, if you're sending over criminals and bad guys, I can see why you don't want them back. But Trump's point is you have to take them. They're yours. They're your citizens. They're not our citizens. They're here in an unauthorized way. Even if the previous administration kind of did a wink, wink and looked the other way, Trump goes 25% tariffs. And if your policies don't change, they will become 50%. Travel bans, visa revocations, sanctions on party members, and he goes, these measures are just the beginning. Now, the Colombian president immediately reacts to this in a very pompous and arrogant way. Basically, he has a long post on X. I don't even need to read all of it. But the essential, very sarcastic, it's like, don't worry, Trump, I don't want to come to America. It's so boring over there. He goes on to say, things like, I like Walt Whitman and Paul Simon and Noam Chomsky, trying to reveal a certain type of sophistication. He goes on to say, basically, I'm a tough guy. Quote, if you know someone who's stubborn, that's me, period. You can't do anything. He goes, even if you try to kill me, we have a history of fighting against oppressors, blah, blah, blah. And this, the left was actually cheering this guy on. And not only cheering this guy on, but going on to say that if Trump imposes these tariffs, we Americans would be hurt. Why? Really, the answer can be summarized in two words. One is coffee, and the other is flowers. I guess we do import some coffee from Colombia. In fact, wasn't there that ad that you and I chuckle at, honey? The Juan Valdez. It looks like we're buying our coffee from this guy Juan Valdez, who is out there in the coffee fields. So we do import some Colombian coffee, but hey, guess what? There's plenty of good coffee that's made all over the world. El Salvador makes some pretty good coffee, and there's very good coffee that's made in African countries as well. What's that? Guatemala makes really good coffee. Well, our friend, one of the investors in one of our movies, has a coffee company in Africa. He goes down there all the time, and he sent us samples of the coffee. Absolutely delicious. So here's the point. If you don't buy it from here, you can buy it from over there. The coffee market, these are, other countries will be very eager to sell more coffee. So that's really not a problem. But the most important thing is this. Who depends more on who? Does the United States depend more on Colombia? Well, the left thinks so. They're like, see, you guys who voted for Trump are real suckers. Valentine's Day is coming up February 14th, and we get our flowers from Colombia. This shows you the level of persuasive power that exists on the other side. It's very, very low. And I can kind of understand a little bit why those guys were so eager to censor us. Classify everything we said as disinformation, misinformation. And the short answer is because they know, in some level, they realize that they're stupid and their arguments don't really hold up. And this is the best they got. As if we're going to be deterred in enforcing immigration laws because of the price of flowers and or coffee. It's just foolishness. What's more valuable? The paying 5 cents more for coffee, or the life of Lake and Riley and all the others who have been victimized by these criminal illegals? So the left, however, their motive is to stop Trump in his tracks. And that's why they're doing this kind of stuff. And so it was to their utter embarrassment that literally 3 hours later, the Colombian president retracts, changes his mind, gives in, agrees to Trump's terms, says that he will accommodate, take these guys back. I think he even said something about using the presidential plane. Now, look, I'm not sure if this is really over or if there's going to be some more back and forth over it, but this is an indication that we have a president in the saddle very different than Biden. This is not somebody who's going to say, oh, I want to send these illegals back, but guess what? These countries aren't going to take them, so that's it. I'm now in a bind. I don't know what to do. No, Trump's idea is, and again, people keep saying when we talk about these tariffs that Trump is somehow against trade. Look, he's trying to use tariffs. Notice how tariffs are being used here, not for, you may say, the conventional purpose of tariffs. When you look at the economics textbooks, we think of tariffs as beginning a trade war. I won't sell to you, you won't sell to me. Trump is using these as a kind of diplomatic stick, a diplomatic bludgeon. a diplomatic battering ram, as if to say, if you don't close the border on your side, Mexico, you're going to get some tariffs. If you won't take back your own illegals, you're going to get some tariffs, Colombia. So this is Trump using negotiating leverage on the global scale and proving that he, in a manner that is characteristic of Trump, he knows how to do it, and actually, he's the guy who does it best. Lots of stuff coming down the pike, increased tariffs on our trade partners, maybe tax cuts, regulation changes. You need to learn why gold is a viable diversification tactic now more than ever. Birch Gold, the only gold company I endorse, is releasing their ultimate guide for gold in the Trump era with a foreword by Donald Trump Jr. You can get a free copy along with Birch Gold's free information kit on gold. Text my name, Dinesh, to the number 989898. Here are some facts. The national debt continues to increase, not good. Our interest payments on the national debt continue to increase, not good. Gold is still your hedge against a weakened dollar, and Birch Gold is still the company I recommend to help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold. Text Dinesh to 989898. You get a free copy of the ultimate guide for gold in the Trump era. There is no obligation, only information. Birch Gold has an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau. Thousands of happy customers. You can trust Birch Gold. Text Dinesh to the number 989898 today. Boy, do I have a great movie for you, and it's coming right up. It's the new heart-pounding military thriller. It's called Valiant One. It has everything you need in a movie. With tensions high between North and South Korea, a U.S. military helicopter crashes deep in North Korean territory. With the platoon leader dead, no rescue coming, young Sergeant Edward Brockman must find a way to get the survivors back to safety. He must rise to the challenge to lead his team on a daring escape through treacherous and hostile territory with enemy soldiers in hot pursuit. Only courage can bring them home. Valiant One has all the grit and explosive action you'd expect, along with a story of survival and bravery under fire. It's going to keep you on the edge of your seat. Hey, all you need is the popcorn. Don't miss this new action thriller from Briarcliff Entertainment and Monarch Media. It's Valiant One, Valiant O-N-E, featuring Chase Stokes and Lana Condor. It's only in theaters January 31st. Guys, I'm delighted to welcome back to the podcast the one and only Jack Posobiec, senior editor of Human Events. You know Jack, he really doesn't need an introduction. You can follow him on X at Jack Posobiec. The website, humanevents.com, and the book, the new book, Bulletproof, The Truth About the Assassination Attempts on Donald Trump. Jack, you know, we didn't see a whole lot of media coverage of the assassination attempts. Even when they happened, there was a kind of quick desire to report this, but then move on. And it's rarely brought up today. And yet, as your book indicates, this, I think, was highly significant. Not simply, of course, in keeping Donald Trump alive so that he could win the election, but perhaps even in shaping, perhaps, I don't know if the character of Trump is the right way to put it, but shaping the kind of momentum and attitude of Trump in this second term that appears to have started with a bang, if I can put it that way. Do you agree with this? And talk about the psychological impact of the assassination attempt or attempts on Trump and on his conduct.
Well, Dinesh, thank you so much again for having me on. And when we put pen to paper or fingers to keys, as it is these days, on that assassination attempt, even the first one, my co-author Joshua Lysek and I actually started writing this even before he had left the hospital, because we knew that something monumentous had taken place, and we weren't sure. We didn't have a book deal or anything at the time, and we just said we have to put this onto paper, because if we don't tell this story, then it already is not going to be told. And we knew in the initial minutes of this, because you can go back to CNN and MSNBC, as you mentioned, not only did they not cover it, they lied about it in the first minutes and hours, telling us, remember the CNN headline, Donald Trump falls on stage in Butler, Pennsylvania. Donald Trump falls. as if he had collapsed, playing into this idea that projection, of course, that he was the one who had these health issues and not Joe Biden, who had just been rushed and whisked from an event in Las Vegas only days before. Another event, by the way, that's been completely overshadowed and by history, though, something that clearly led to him dropping out of the race, or should I say being pulled out of the race by his own party. CNN as well, when the second assassination attempt took place, was trying to tell us that, oh, there were gunshots heard near the golf course or near to where Donald Trump was golfing. Yes, there were gunshots that were heard near to where Donald Trump was golfing. It was gunshots from a Secret Service agent firing at a would-be assassin who had received some type of training or experience and techniques from the Ukrainian foreign fighters that he had been associated with before traveling back to West Palm Beach, Florida. So to answer your question, President Trump, and I've had the opportunity to speak with him about this, a little bit about the book, and I've also had time to see him. Of course, we've seen the last few days have been, it's nothing like the first term. It's nothing like the first term at all. And he even said in the Capitol Rotunda there during his inauguration that he believes that his life was saved for a purpose. And he believes that that purpose was to do the things that he is doing now. And I remember there's a scene that we talk about in the book Bulletproof where he's delivering, and I was in the room when he did this, he's delivering the speech at the RNC back in Milwaukee, only, keep in mind, that was only days after surviving this attempt. And we've a lot of exclusive reporting behind the scenes about the machinations that had gone into there. He appoints J.D. Vance as the vice president just a day after surviving this would-be assassin's bullet, a clearly miraculous attempt. But then he does something in that speech in Milwaukee that he doesn't normally do. I've never seen him do this before. So he says to the crowd, you know, I wasn't supposed to be here. And then the crowd starts chanting, yes, you were, yes, you were, yes, you were. And then he stops and corrects the crowd. He disagrees with MAGA. He disagrees with his own supporters. You never see Trump do this. You never, ever see him do this before. He says, no, I was not supposed to be here, but I believe that that bullet was going to hit me, but I was saved by the grace of God himself. And as we all know, Donald Trump is many things, but having that direct credibility, having that direct authenticity, speaking directly to God, speaking directly from God. This isn't a type of Trump that we've seen before. This isn't the Trump certainly of the 80s and 90s when he's across the tabloids and his relationships are playing out the Playboy lifestyle that he once had. But perhaps something changed in him, and that's actually why we used the cover that we did. It's not the picture of Trump with his fist raised that we all have seen. We actually used the picture of Trump lower. And he asked me, he said, Jack, why did you choose that cover? I think he was even a little surprised. And I said, well, we've never seen you like this before, Mr. President. We've never seen you on the ground, on your knees, with your hands clasped in public, as if, and I think to any believer out there, as if in prayer. And I believe that's the moment, truly, that I believe this, and I think Trump believes this as well, that God spoke to him in that moment and said, Donald, this is not your time. You are being saved for a greater purpose. And I believe that purpose is what we're seeing now.
You know, in the conversation I had with Trump for Vindicating Trump, the film, he came to the same conclusion, but by a slightly different route that I think you'll find just as fascinating and interesting. It's almost like a little bit of Christian apologetics from Donald Trump, if you can believe it. Now, you know, you mentioned a moment ago, and I agree completely, this sort of rhetoric, which came naturally, for example, to Bush, it came somewhat naturally to Reagan. Reagan was a little whimsical about God. He'd be like, the man upstairs and things like that. But nevertheless, Reagan did have a sort of natural religiosity. Trump, this is something quite new. And in discussing the assassination, what Trump does is he basically starts running a casino model of the probability of his survival. He goes on to, you're right, yes. He basically, he's a, you know, think of it, he's a casino guy, Atlantic City, Las Vegas. He knows improbability. Knows the odds. And it's one thing to say that something is improbable. I mean, what's the chance that you get 7 heads in a row? For example, if you toss a coin, it's not that high. But this is a level of improbability of a completely different dimension, because apparently Trump's head had to be in exactly the spot that it was for the bullet to graze him. Pretty much any other location, even by a fractional movement of his head, and the guy wouldn't be here. So I think when you reflect upon that, you realize that you're not talking about, a normal coincidence. You are talking about miraculous levels of improbability. And I think that has given Trump some genuine theological pause, if you will. But what you're saying, Jack, is that we're seeing the fruits of that this animated, energetic, no holds barred Trump that we're seeing now is the fruit, the result of this epochal event.
That's exactly right. That's the millimeter miracle, as some have dubbed it. In fact, one other thing that we look up in probability in terms of the book is we go through what we call the 12 independent security failures that took place in Butler, and then we actually went into GPT-4, which at the time was the most powerful AI that was available. I don't know, perhaps the stock market guys are telling me the Chinese model is better now, but I haven't tested that yet. But we went into it, we put in the probabilities, and we said, okay, 12 independent security failures, any one of which we identified, would have stopped the would-be assassin Thomas Matthew Crooks, the drone, the Secret Service perimeter, so many things that we plug into this. And then what is the probability of that all occurring on the same day that a trained marksman with malicious intent would attempt to kill Donald Trump in the manner that we're now describing? The answer that the AI gave us back was 1 in 1 septillion, which would be about the same as, going back to the casino model, the same as you or I flipping a coin 95 times in a row and it always coming up heads each time. Now, if Jack Posobiec or Dinesh D'Souza did that in a casino, we'd probably be arrested because they would know we were cheating. But of course, somehow this takes place in Butler, Pennsylvania, and we're told that it's just a coincidence and it's just by chance. We then went a step further and we asked AI, could this have happened by chance? AI responded to us in a very sinister and ominous response. It said, given the high level of unlikelihood of the probability of this occurring naturally, then it is far more likely that it did not occur by chance alone.
So would you say, Jack, then, taking that in full seriousness, that what really happened in Butler was that you did have a lone assassin, perhaps, but that there were certainly at least some people in authority that either knew about this or looked the other way with a certain kind of deliberate carelessness? In other words, that there has to be more to it than just one dopey guy who decides, I'm going to go out and kill Donald Trump.
At this point, the best way that we put it and the way we describe it in the book is a form of intentional neglect, intentional negligence. But the idea being Joe Biden is right down the road in the same area of responsibility, the AOR, area of operations, as Pittsburgh. So this is just outside of Pittsburgh where Butler is, and yet she's given 14 Secret Service agents for an indoor dinner fundraiser that she's having for the campaign. Remember, Biden's still the nominee at this point, whereas President Trump is delivering his speech outdoors in the middle of the day in a field, one of the most potentially fatal events that any president or presidential candidate can do. And of course, we all remember Dealey Plaza, JFK, 1963. So we all remember and all know indelibly that this is the most potentially fatal or potentially dangerous thing that a candidate can do. And yet they only ascribe him 2 extra Secret Service agents. And it comes out later that the lead agent was actually a Secret Service agent, 1811, who had only been on the force for about 3 years since graduating from FLETC down in Brunswick, Georgia, the training course that they have for all federal agents. And so this led to serious questions about why these decisions were made by the now former acting Secret Service directors, Kim Reynolds, as well as Ryan, the second individual who was there. And not Ryan Routh, he was the other one. But the question, of course, becomes, why was it that these inexperienced agents were put up there? And in fact, even the drone operator didn't know how to operate the drone that day. He spent 5 hours on customer support waiting for them to answer him on the 1-800 number, whereas Thomas Matthew Crooks's drone, we know, flew without incident hours prior to President Trump taking the stage that day with completely undetected and right under the nose of 5 separate law enforcement agencies that had been scheduled there to maintain the perimeter, as well as the president's security and the security of the crowd, I might add, one of whom, tragically, as we know, lost his life, named Corey Compatore. And so when I look to later this week, of course, the nomination of Kash Patel comes in as FBI director, Pam Bondi also coming up for a vote as attorney general. This book, Bulletproof, actually becomes the blueprint, if you will, for a potential roadmap of investigations that really need to take place, because not only does President Trump need this kind of accountability, all presidential candidates need this type of accountability going forward. This is a nonpartisan issue, but also Corey Compatore and his family, his wife and daughters, which I had the honor of meeting at the second Butler rally very briefly. They deserve answers for why their father was not able to come home with them that day.
Absolutely. We'll be right back with Jack Posobiec. For years, customers have been asking if MyPillow sells cross necklaces like the one Mike Lindell proudly wears every day. Well, MyPillow is excited to announce that Mike has partnered with a jeweler right in the USA to create beautiful sterling silver My Crosses. You can get one. In fact, you can save 30% today using promo code Dinesh at mypillow.com or call 800-876-0227. You can choose from the women's or men's style. The My Cross for women, it has a more delicate look. It's reversible with mother-of-pearl style translucent white enamel on one side and onyx style black enamel on the other. The My Cross for men has a slightly larger cross with onyx style black enamel and a slightly longer, thicker chain. This is a great deal and it won't last long, so order now. Go to mypillow.com or you can call 800-876-0227. Don't forget to use the promo code. It's DINESH, Dinesh. I'm back with Jack Posobiec, Senior Editor of Human Events. Follow him on X at Jack Posobiec, the website humanevents.com. The book, we've been talking about Bulletproof, the truth about the assassination attempts on Donald Trump. Jack, this is a big week for cabinet nominations. I'm not sure if Tulsi Gabbard is up this week, but she's certainly in the lineup. Yes, she is up this week. All right. And then we have the Pam Bondi vote. Kash Patel, I think we all know, is going to be the one that the Democrats are going to really try to zing him. And what is your sense? Trump so far has done well on the nomination front after the Matt Gaetz pullout. He's got Hegseth through, albeit narrowly. What is your sense about what's going to happen this week, and are any of these nominations in trouble?
Well, thanks, Dinesh. And also what I would add is RFK Jr. comes up on Wednesday. I think RFK, Tulsi, and Kash, I think we all know that those are the three that currently maintain the highest level of attention on, shall we say, the deep state radar, the old consensus, old guard, bipartisan consensus radar. That's why Pete Hegseth only got 50 votes and J.D. Vance had to come in as the tiebreaker, because these are actual change agents coming into Washington, D.C. Tulsi Gabbard is not someone who comes from the intelligence community. She's someone who has experience actually being on the battlefield, actually having been in combat on bases in northern Iraq while they were being shelled by groups that later went on to become extreme radicals and are now fighting and apparently have taken over Syria, as a matter of fact, some of whom other offshoots have turned into the group ISIS. So she's someone who absolutely understands what it's like to be under fire, what it's like to lead troops in combat, as well as J.D. Vance and as well as Pete Hegseth, who also have combat experience from the battlefield. The military-industrial complex does not want anyone like that to ever have political power. That's precisely why President Trump has put them there. Now, with RFK Jr., I
Well,
love the
one thought
Maha
about Jack,
movement.
one thought about Tulsi
Oh, yes,
before
go
he
ahead.
moved to RFK, which is she's also been on the receiving end of the police state sort of no travel list,
Yes,
right? In other words, she's
yes,
been
that's right.
she has been flagged as a security threat herself. I mean, think about the insanity of that. And Department of Homeland Security apparently had her on a kind of a surveillance list, so she knows what these people are capable of. And that's, as you say, that they don't want someone like that to
No,
be
they
in
don't want
charge.
someone who has had that experience as well as understanding the abuses of the system. And this Tulsi Gabbard is currently serving lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve. So lieutenant colonel, by the way, it's an '05. That is not low rank in any way, the way they're trying to claim. Actually, for astute observers of the president's cabinet, Tulsi Gabbard technically would outrank Pete Hegseth if they were both in uniform. He's an '04, she's an '05. I believe he got out. I'm not sure, but point being is these are people with real world experience, not Washington D.C. Beltway insider experience. Then, yeah, I suppose that's a good segue over to Kash Patel, and you already mentioned he's someone that the FBI does not want to look. We know what Kash Patel did when he was on the House Intelligence Committee, digging into Russiagate, digging into the origins, the abuses of the FBI. He's also someone who I admit I didn't even know this about Cash until I was getting to know his record a little bit better. He spent 10 years as a public defender. So defending people who had been accused of crimes, many of whom, both at the state level and the federal level, not anything that you'd know about, Dinesh, falsely accused of crimes, even at the federal level. And he spent a decade defending people like that against government abuses. Then he became a lawyer for the Department of Justice under, believe it or not, the Obama administration, going after criminals, going after terrorists, going after some of the worst of the worst, even at one point receiving a commendation from the Obama Department of Justice. And now, of course, they want to turn around and say that he's some sort of Trump loyalist, when in fact it was the Obama administration that even gave him an award. Dinesh, I know you're a huge fan of the Obama Department of Justice, of course. And and so putting him in charge of the FBI, I think, is a breath of fresh air to everyone, to an understanding of that organization, that institution needs a complete reform from the top down, an understanding of what went wrong, what they do get right, and how to separate the two out. And Kash Patel is absolutely demanded to do that. That's why they don't like him. It's not because he doesn't have the resume. It's because he's not a company man. He's willing to actually do the right thing for the people.
Do you think, Jack? I mean, we've heard Tulsi, we've heard RFK, we've heard Cash. I mean, these are people of not only high intelligence, but people who can talk circles around the other side. Cash's depth of knowledge on the details of things is actually kind of awe-inspiring. I mean, he remembers the names of the 51 intelligence officials who and what their positions were, and how the letter got started, and who sent it out to who to be signed. And in other words, he's got chapter and verse. And I find the same thing in listening to RFK, that this guy has a knowledge at a depth that I have a feeling that this is going to be kind of a treat to watch. In other words, these people are going to make mincemeat of these Democratic senators who, by and large, as you know, are going to be handed a list of questions which they will then pompously recite one after the other. I don't think that they quite know what they're dealing with.
Actually, it's a great point you mentioned that, because this came up with Scott Bessent as well when he was up as the Secretary of Treasury nominee, when he clearly just knew more than the senators who were asking him the questions. And he's explaining to them how the bond market works and how Treasury bills work and how debt works and debt financing and all of these things. And you learn this, and I spent time at a little bit of time, about a year at Guantanamo Bay, and I worked in the interrogation cell. And you also hear this from lawyers as well, that when you come up with a questioning plan, when you come up with a plan to ask someone something, that you also need to be able to react to the things that they're saying. So to your point, if a staffer is coming up with your questions, you need to be prepared for anything that they are going to say back. Because if they go over and outside of what we would call your knowledge base, if they go outside that knowledge base, now suddenly you are going to look like a complete fool because you are acting as if you knew something that you clearly have no experience. And you saw this again and again with Scott Bessent, where he was running circles around them because they would ask him one question and then he would start to question them back. Well, which type of treasury bond do you mean? Do you mean this one, this one, this one, this one? This is
Right.
off the top of his head. Kash Patel, I'm sure, which part of the FISA process are we talking about? Are we talking about Article 1, Article 2, Section 1, Section 2? Are we talking about 702? Which one do you mean specifically? Can you get a little bit more granular with this? He's able to go to that level, and it's a level that certainly that our senators have not seen. But what the true exposition, and RFK, of course, I mean, I think it goes without saying, RFK clearly, with his knowledge. By the way, I don't know if I've said this ever publicly about RFK, but I'll say it. He's not popular because he's a Kennedy. He's popular because of what he says and the stances that he takes. If anything, he's eschewed being a Kennedy. He's been completely excommunicated by the family. He's been completely attacked by them. He's been publicly attacked by them. But it's because he takes the stands that he does against the power centers, whether it be health, whether it be food, whether it be pharma, and he's able to do so with all the facts at his fingertips. That's why his Dr. Fauci book became the #1 book in America, even though no one will admit it. Believe me, I've seen the numbers, and I do a little bit of publishing. That guy outsold all of us combined. And it's not because he's a Kennedy. If anything, he's an anti-celebrity. It's because of the power of the truths that he is spreading. And so this is why it just goes to show you, what has our government been made of? If not these people who have superior intellects like this, who have actually been ruling over us for all of these years, who's been making the decisions? If not the best of the best, then is it possible that we in fact have the worst of the worst? And I think that's what's really being exposed through this process.
Here's a post from this guy, Walter Kern, who's a literary guy, but very smart. And a guy who started out on the left, but has moved into the Trump camp. And I think he sums up what we're talking about. I'm just going to read a couple of sentences here. He goes, "It was a con over and over, year after year, decade after decade." He says Americans, he says, basically we're servicing the con, keeping it going, distributing the proceeds, covering it up, financing its debts, legitimizing its shoddy tactics. And he says all of this is going on. And he goes, now it's almost like we're waking up from it. And I think with RFK Jr., the great accomplishment of this guy is to take an issue that was almost not even on anybody's horizon. I mean, the issue of our food, as far as I can tell, Jack, has not been part of our political discussion in 30 years. And it's not easy to take an issue that is off the table, so to speak, and introduce it with such forcefulness that now it's almost impossible to think of politics without including that.
Precisely right. And Walter Kern's fantastic. He's the author of Up in the Air, by the way. It's just a great novel, great movie, and all about outsourcing and the changes to our economy during the Great Recession. And he just understood what was going on in a way that I think so many people missed. What Bobby Kennedy did, which then President Trump realized made so much sense for the alliance, was he took that issue of healthcare, which used to be a Democrat issue. We remember the Obamacare debates. We remember all of it. But it seems like Obamacare got passed and the Democrats completely forgot about healthcare. They completely forgot about the issue. They completely forgot about talking about it and the power politically of that issue of, I'm going to help you care for yourselves and for your children. But they came about it through a completely different way that I'll just be frank, nobody saw coming. Nobody saw this coming, but it had been bubbling up here and there throughout the years, people asking questions about what's going on. And I'll even say it from my own perspective. And My wife comes from Eastern Europe. And so her coming to America, she was always asking us questions. She said, "Why do you have this long list of things on all of your food? Why do you guys have all these injuries and allergies and diseases that I've never..." Dinesh, my wife had, Tanya, she had never heard of a food allergy until she came to America. She came here when she was 18. She had never heard of a food allergy. And I remember she even said, remarked on, she said, "How could you be allergic to food? How is that even possible?" It's a completely foreign concept, but because Americans are so used to it, because we've been so conditioned to live with these things, that we act as though it's completely normal. When it turns out on a lot of these questions, we're the North Koreans. We're the ones who have been propagandized to believe that this is normal, and to also not realize that we can choose to live in a different way.
Guys, I've been talking to Jack Posobiec, senior editor of Human Events. Follow him on X at Jack Posobiec, the website humanevents.com, the book Bulletproof, the truth about the assassination attempts on Donald Trump. Jack, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Dinesh, God bless, man.
I'm in the section of the Big Lie in which we're talking about eugenics. And I alluded the last time to the fact that there was an international community of eugenicists. There were powerful people in America. The champions of eugenics in Great Britain included the Fabian socialist George Bernard Shaw, the utopian leftist novelist H.G. Wells, and the progressive economist John Maynard Keynes. In Germany, the German physician Alfred Plotz was one of the old guys who championed eugenics and became a prominent Nazi. Ernest Rudin founded the Society for Racial Hygiene. He was a socialist, and he became an architect of the Nazi eugenic program. And he also did the selection committee for who got chosen to be sterilized. And the point here is that all these leading eugenicists were men of the left, and they interacted closely with progressives in other parts of Europe and also in the United States. They would go to these international eugenics conferences. By and large, the Americans were considered the most advanced eugenic community in the world. The Germans, number two. The Germans followed the American programs because they thought that the Americans were more on the cutting edge. Eventually, as we'll see, the Germans went even further than the Americans. It's this interaction I want to explore. Let's talk about Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. I want to focus on two of her articles, January 1932, My Way to Peace, and March 27, 1934, America Needs a Code for Babies. So we'll start with the second article. And so Sanger says she wants the government to have a code, meaning a protocol, a program. For what? Quote, "For the better distribution of babies to protect society against the propagation and increase of the unfit." So quite clearly here, some babies should be encouraged and should live, others should not. The code, she says, should be that, quote, "No woman shall have the legal right to bear a child, and no man shall have the right to become a father without a permit for fatherhood. And moreover, quote, no permit for parenthood shall be valid for more than one birth." One permit, one kid. And this has to be approved by some centralized process. You can see right here how this left-wing eugenic progressivism fits right in with the idea of the centralized state. All these people are on board with the idea of committees that make decisions for other people about whether and how many kids you can have. Now, let's hear Margaret Sanger talking about the, quote, unfit. "Many groups of the socially unfit, as for example, feeble-minded and criminal, are not sufficiently susceptible to education or the moral pressure of the community." So in other words, these people are beyond the pale. You can't fix them. You can't educate them. You can't talk them out of it. They need to be controlled. Sanger says there are about 5 million Americans meeting her criteria for, quote, mental or moral degenerates. So just in case you were thinking, well, gee, obviously people who are totally feeble-minded are really rare. No. In Margaret Sanger's view, this is not a matter of most people are normal and 1 out of 100 is considered feeble. She thinks that there's a spectrum from the feeble to the capable. And depending on how many feeble-minded people you want to identify, it could be 1%, 3%, 5%, maybe 10% of the population. And she says, for such people, sterilization is indicated. But if you can't do that, they should be so isolated as to prevent the perpetuation of their afflictions by breeding. So sterilize them if you can. If you can't, segregate them. And in her 1932 article, Sanger calls for the establishment of, quote, farmlands and homesteads where these segregated persons would be taught to work under competent instructors and prevented from reproducing, quote, for the period of their whole life. Wow. So look at how these ideas of segregation are not confined to blacks. Obviously, Sanger thought a lot of blacks fit into these categories, but it applies to everybody. And here we have an idea that there are better and worse people in society, and the worst people need to be prevented from reproducing. Margaret Sanger was invited in the 1920s to speak to the women's chapter of the Ku Klux Klan in New Jersey, and she also established a, quote, special Negro project to pressure poor blacks to enroll in these birth control and sterilization programs. Here is an excerpt from a letter to a friend, an associate. This is a guy named Clarence Gamble. Sanger says she's explaining to him why she hired a bunch of black ministers, clergymen, to be her ambassadors to the black community. Quote, we do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members. Now, this is a very interesting quotation, and it can, in fact, be read in two ways. One way is to say we, meaning Sanger, do want to exterminate the Negro population, but she doesn't want the black people to find out about that. That's one way to read it. Maybe that's the harsher way to read it. The most benign way to read it is this. We're not trying here to exterminate the Negro population as a whole. We're merely trying to prevent feeble-minded and unfit people from reproducing. And so we need to have black ministers who are sure the black population, we're not trying to get rid of everybody, only the unfit. That is the most charitable way to read what Sanger is saying. And that is in a sense incriminating or damning enough. Now, the American progressives around Sanger were people like Gamble. This is the guy that she's communicating with. He funded some of Sanger's projects. He spoke at her conferences. Another of her associates was a guy named Lothrop Stoddard. He published in Sanger's magazines. He was on the board of the American Birth Control League. This was the predecessor to Sanger's Planned Parenthood. And listen to the kind of books that Stoddard was the author of. His bestseller was called The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy. Now, today, if you saw a book like that, it would sound like a left-wing book, right? The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy. But Lothrop Stoddard was writing about this from the opposite point of view, meaning there's a bunch of colored people trying to overthrow white supremacy. White supremacy is great. We need to keep these people down. So that was basically the theme of this book. It portrayed the pristine Nordic race being swamped by immigration and interracial marriage by degenerate hordes from lesser races. By the way, both Lothrop and Gamble became Nazi sympathizers, and they wanted to import some of the Nazi sterilization programs into America. Here's Gamble. He says, the Nazi program, quote, will secure Germany a place in the history of races. And it, quote, sets the pattern which other nations and other racial groups must follow. So these guys are like, even though the Nazis are supposed to be behind us, they're going ahead of us. We need to catch up with them. We need to take some of their ideas now and bring them to America. Lothrop was so excited by the idea of the Nazi sterilization program. He flew to Germany. He met with the top Nazi racial eugenicists, Eugen Fischer and Fritz Lenz. He also met with Himmler, who later became the sort of top lieutenant to Hitler, and Joachim von Ribbentrop. This is the guy who signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop. Remember the Soviet-Nazi pact? That's Ribbentrop. And he got a coveted audience with Hitler. Think about this. Here's an American left-winger, friend of Margaret Sanger, sitting across the desk, if you will, or across the chair from Adolf Hitler. And then wrote a book in 1940, which was a kind of celebration of Hitler and Nazi eugenics. So these were the circles in which Margaret Sanger moved. And now we turn to Sanger herself. April 1933, in the Birth Control Review, this is the name of a magazine, Sanger publishes her article, Eugenic Sterilization, an Urgent Need. Sanger is the editor. She's publishing an article, and it's written by Ernst Rudin, who is chief architect of the Nazi sterilization program, and by the way, a mentor of Josef Mengele. So think about this. You have these Nazi sterilization guys publishing in American magazines edited by Margaret Sanger. And then Sanger herself in 1938, when the Nazi sterilization was in full swing, she urges America to pretty much follow the example of the Nazis. Quote, in animal industry, the poor stock is not allowed to breed. In gardens, the weeds are kept down. America, says Sanger, should learn from the Germans and carry out nature's own mandate to get rid of what she calls, open quote, human weeds, end quote.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.